I'm Alicia. I work as a head of development in the fundraising team at Action Syria. And today you'll be hearing from two of our trustees, George and Mazen, who will be in conversation with our CEO, Rose. So they'll share sort of reflections and stories, giving us a little window into the everyday sort of realities, challenges, and the hope that continues as Syria begins its new chapter. As many of you will likely know, both Rose and George are founding members of Action Syria, with Rose now leading the charity as CEO. And then Mazen joined our board, I'm going to say 2023, and I hope that's right, and brings sort of deep insight into Syria's political context. So we'll start with their conversation, and then we'll follow that up with a short Q&A. So please do pop any questions in the chat, and my colleague Ashni is there to keep an eye on them. And if you prefer to do that anonymously, you can directly message her as well. So as a reminder, if you could just keep our cameras and our mics off, and I will hand over to Rose to get us started.
Hi, everybody. Nice to be with you on a Wednesday lunchtime. I'm going to jump straight in then, George and Mazen, and ask you a couple of questions, if I may. So, George, you were obviously in Syria before Christmas and for a couple of months earlier this year. Having returned, what stayed with you the most?
Hello, everybody. Nice to see some friendly names on here. Yeah, I went to Syria just after the 8th of December, a couple of days after the fall of the regime. And I think that, I'm just full of information, so please cut me off. But I think the two things that stuck with me the most were, well, first of all, that I thought I knew a lot about Syria. We've been working on it for 10 years. We haven't been allowed there, but after 3 months, I realized that I knew very little, and I defer to Mazen as often as I could for what was actually going on. But the two things that stuck with me, even though we spent time working on it, were the destruction, this kind of widespread sort of concrete dust and buildings that had been razed to the ground, not really in Damascus or in Aleppo, but specifically in the Sunni areas, al-Sakari in Aleppo, East Ghouta, Entema, Harasta, razed to the ground for just being from the Sunni of town. And that led into something that I think is impossible to get, was impossible to get mind, but just like the extent, the Stasi-like extent of the information keeping and this sort of vindictive, humiliating, hypnotizing pressure that they kept the entire country under as hostages, unwilling hosts to the regime, and that was the background to all the people I spoke to.
Thank you, George. I think that's extremely helpful and kind of it paints a very vivid image. Thank you. Mazen, you're obviously from Syria. You're from Homs originally, and obviously you work very closely on it too. What are you hearing about life on the ground now?
Thank you so much, Rose, and thank you for everyone who joined us. Just a bit of background, reflecting on what George said. As most of you know, for the past 14 years, Syria witnessed extreme levels of violence, and it's considered one of the worst humanitarian crises in modern history. Systematic detention, torture, indiscriminate area bombardments, using barrel bombs and chemical weapons. The vital infrastructure, hospitals, the electricity and water supplies have almost completely collapsed all over the country. The last 5 years that preceded the fall of Assad is particularly described by people in Syria, including my friends and family who are still there, as the worst in terms of economic hardship and deteriorating and living conditions. For instance, my parents described people under Assad, specifically in the final years of Assad, as kind of living zombies roaming the streets without any hope or a glimpse of hope in the future. People felt Assad will remain forever, sanctions will remain forever, and there's no hope. The country will not anytime soon. That's shifted dramatically on December the 8th, when the Assad regime has fallen after a swift military operation led by Hayat Tahrir Sham HT military group that was located in northwest Syria. And of course, as you can imagine, these hardships are still there. They cannot magically disappear. Assad left the country with almost nothing. The central bank reserve, for instance, can barely cover 3 months' salaries for the public sector employees. The electricity capacity is still very bad. People used to have like an hour of electricity a day. Now they have like 2 hours per day, and for many people, that's a win. That's a small win. Despite all of that, the major transformation, I would say, that happened after the fall of Assad, after we were liberated from Assad, is the reintroduction of hope to people. I've never seen my father smile in a while, in like for a decade or so, and now he's always smiling. He's hopeful that something will change. Assad is no longer there, so there's now an opportunity to move forward, to just step into the current century, and you can see this hope kind of manifested by the proliferation of local initiatives all over Syria. People are now, for instance, organizing themselves to regulate traffic, because there's, in most cities, in most areas and villages, there are no traffic police anymore. So people are taking that into their own hands. They're kind of organizing garbage collection campaigns. They're trying also to kind of support each other, provide humanitarian assistance to each other. For a long time, Syria was fragmented, and Syrians were not able to visit each other, to know each other. So now also you can see Syrians kind of leaving Damascus, going to Idlib. It was out of reach for 14 years. Going to Aleppo. People from Homs are now kind of re-exploring their own Syria, their own country. And I believe this is what gives me hope, and this is kind of one of the major transformation that happened after Assad. And I believe, George, you encountered a lot of these initiatives and a lot of these also kind of energetic young Syrians who are trying to do something, small scaled initiatives and solidarity campaigns that are now happening all over Syria.
Yes,
Yeah.
on every corner. And also just not to forget, and also just to make clear that Action Syria hasn't forgotten that we know exactly the history of where the new government has come from. We feel, or I feel, that they're trying to do the right thing. Perhaps one of the criticisms of Syrian people about the new government is that most of their focus has been outward looking. They've been trying, being at Davos with Shibani, the foreign minister. They've been wearing smart suits. They've been doing The Rest is Politics podcasts. But the complaints, of course, from Syrians who have very high standards, fiercely proud, loyal, expectant of their government, are that they're not doing enough, and electricity is still a problem. But there really is, when we think about in this country, in the UK, when someone says, there was a hole in the finances, or the last lot didn't leave much behind, this is like that 1,000 million times over. There is nothing. The ministries are rotten to the core. All the money has disappeared, and that is the challenge. But I suppose to sort of shed some light on the sorts of people I met. I met a man in Duma. Taufik lost his family in a chemical attack. The next morning, the Russian press, he said, arrived to tell him that he couldn't say that the Russians or the government had done it, but he had to hold a microphone and say that it was the terrorists. And it was the terrorists. This sort of phrase is used in all the people I spoke to. if ever you were doing something that the government didn't like, helping people protesting, you were a terrorist or you're assisting terrorists. And that is a very common story. So yeah, Tawfiq was one of those. But I can tell you about a few more in a minute. But Rose, what keep us on track?
No, I think that would be good to hear. I think we'd love to hear some more of those human stories, the people you met. Are there any other stories apart from that one you've just mentioned that really
Oh my God.
jumps
Yeah,
out?
okay. Well, interrupt me, but yeah, so I spent 2 months interviewing people. Who was there? There was Abu Fayed. He was a tunnel digger in Ghouta, trying to get under the Russian positions. He came up from his tunnel one day and couldn't work out why the birds and the pets were dead on the street, and there'd been a chemical attack which killed his father. He came home to that. Um, there was Hasna, this amazing young woman, female journalist, who gave pregnancy whilst under siege in Ghouta, and then she had to flee to Azaz. Um, Started a journalist network, 45 women volunteers only writing about women's stories. Manal, a 60-year-old woman, gave birth in prison, didn't see her child for 11 years or her husband. They reunited just Christmas. Um, who else? I spoke to an Alawite member of I have to say this carefully so I don't get him in trouble, of a kind of ministry position before. He's been threatened by the new government. They visited his home lots of times. He's now fled with his family to Lebanon and is trying to find somewhere else to live. Who else did I meet along the way? I also, yeah,
And
go on.
interrupt you, George. And what about that balance of, the extraordinary hope, the smiles Mazen mentioned, seeing on his father's face for the first time in years, and perhaps the concern or fear for the future of Syria? Maybe George, you start, and then Mazen can pick that question up too.
I think that arriving on the 11th of December, as I did, as a foreigner, as someone who has always had a hope for the Syrian people, it was very easy to be caught up in this jubilant atmosphere that Mazen talks about. There were people on the street coming up to you, giving you roses, giving you dates, saying, "This is the first time I've seen my friends happy. They're different people. Thank you for coming. We thought that Syria was you guys thought that Syria was scary, and now we know that um, you're not scared of us, and that we're normal." Uh, and then I suppose the only surprising thing is that the massacres that we saw in March on the coast perhaps didn't happen sooner. Um, I think that all Syrians were expecting something to go wrong, mainly because that was what they knew. They knew that they'd only ever been treated in this very revengeful way, and so there was an expectation that they would be treated like that again. And the new government lost control of some groups on those few days, and the outcome has been horrific. And it's been also a kind of awakening to the situation that Syria faces. Is that a fair representation, Mazen?
Definitely, George. Exactly as you said, that beneath that new hope, there's also this undeniable um, uh, reality of severe social division and sectarianism after 14 years of violence. And as you said, that sadly manifested in a massacre in the Alawite majority region of the coastal areas in Syria. What started as kind of an armed regime remnant attacking the newly formed general security turned into absolute chaos that resulted in the killings of more than 1,000 civilians, mostly Alawites. This has awakened many Syrians to the brutal legacy and that we have to deal with. But within that chaos, within this, to be honest, unavoidable reality of sectarianism and violence in the post-Assad era, a lot of people, a lot of Syrians are establishing social cohesion initiatives, trying to do intercommunal dialogues between Alawites and Sunnis and Christians and other sects and religion that we have in Syria. There are a lot of these social cohesion groups that are even in the coastal areas, in Damascus and Aleppo, everywhere, trying to at least address the atrocities of the past, trying to give a voice for the new victims, trying to make people meet each other. So, for instance, there was this beautiful initiative that invited mothers, some of the mothers of the people who were killed by the regime's army, with the mothers of people who were killed in the coastal massacre last March, and they met each other. They shared their grief for the people they lost, and in that way, people are trying to find justice. They're trying to find conciliation, taking small steps. But as George said, the current situation is extremely turbulent, fragile. Most Syrians are aware of it. Of course, there are a lot of sectarian-driven rhetorics on social media that's not helping anyone. A lot of disinformation, a lot of misinformation that's also contributing to the retaliatory violence against different minorities, specifically the Alawite minority. But again, the Syrian people, the Syrian society is trying to, the civil society is trying to address these issues by creating and establishing this intercommunal network, trying to.
Mazen, what do you think? What do you think the government's trying to do? You've got, people within that circle. What's on their priority list?
So with the new government that's now formed, we have also to acknowledge that almost half of the new government are very capable technical people who are not directly affiliated with HTS. And a lot of them are leaders in the civil society. But of course, the other half of the government is pretty much within the hands of HTS. However, as
when you say HTS, maybe just explain what that is. I know everybody on this call probably knows, but
exactly. So HTS is short for Hayat Tahrir Sham. Hayat Tahrir Sham is the armed group who governed Idlib for the past 8 years. Had a previous ties with transnational jihadist groups, including Al Qaeda. But then 2016, they defected from Al Qaeda and they kind of changed a lot of their ideology. Personally, I believe the top tier government, the top tier leadership of the new government, the transitional president Ahmed Shara and the new foreign minister Shibani, they abandoned transnational jihadism ideology a long time ago, and they replaced it with the state building ideology. Of course, their vision or their strategy for state building, but they abandoned that, and they're pretty much looking at kind of rebuilding the states in different ways. But again, we might agree with some of their vision, we might disagree with some of it.
My feeling was that they would love to that sort of controlling power had become more important than some religious belief, and that if they could persuade the government, I know you want to talk about this, but if they could persuade the international community to take them off the terror list and the WTO and to take them off the sanctions list, then that would be a step in the right direction.
I would like to comment on the sanction issue, but first I would just to reflect on your questions about what do they want. Of course, they know that any sort of sectarian violence is harmful for everyone. It's harmful for their own project. It's harmful for the continuation of them being in power. So they're trying to control the situation in the coastal region as much as they can. They formed a special committee to investigate the massacre. They're also in the midst of creating a national transitional justice commission that would address some of the atrocities and might give people some sort of a closure in different areas. But again, there's a shift. You can see a rift between the top of the pyramid. Again, the top leaders of the current political authorities, who I personally believe they have more or less an inclusive or a willingness for inclusive state building, but that doesn't really translate sometimes to the fighters at the base of the pyramid, and that might create certain fragmentations and rifts.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. I am going to stop you, not because it isn't fascinating, because it is, but I do want to leave some time for questions. I know there's so much we could cover. I feel like we should have done an hour, but to give everybody time to ask their questions as well. George, Mazen, thank you for that. I'm going to very briefly, before we go into the question section, the Q&A, talk about what Action Syria are doing. That's an important piece too. That was really moving, George, Mazen, thank you. Interesting to hear about, obviously, the challenges that Syrian communities are facing, as well as some of the hopes and fears, etc. As many of you know, we've worked for over a decade with local partners, making sure Syrian communities have the medical care and education they need every day and when emergencies strike. And I think in many ways, what we were doing over those years is doing what we could while hoping, like so many Syrians were, for change. Change has now come, and while it remains to be seen how that will play out politically, economically, security-wise for Syrian communities, hope must become action. Our focus still remains on medical care and education, but as Syria has opened up, we too are broadening our horizons. We've only ever worked previously when the Assad regime was in control in areas that they did not have control over. Now there's an opportunity to work with communities all over the country. The needs are vast, they are nationwide. I can't pretend that we have the resources to work everywhere and with everyone. We would love that. We're working on it. But what we can do is respond with small local organizations who are already rebuilding their country. And as always, we will take our lead from them. They are the ones who know and understand the needs and contexts of their communities better than anyone. So in the last few months, we've been talking to various civil society organizations to try and establish where we can make the greatest difference. We've been looking particularly at neglected areas. Those are the rural areas around the likes of Aleppo, Homs, Damascus, and we hope to announce some new partnerships in the coming weeks. In the meantime, our long-standing education program with Sawa in Lebanon remains, as does our prosthetic program in northwest Syria with PAC. As Mazen and George have referred to, the situation in Syria is changing by the day. Have to be flexible to be able to respond to that. And I think one of the benefits of being a small organization is that we can do that. We can be nimble, we can be quick with who and where we work. And it's the unrestricted funding that we receive that is funding without strings attached, which allows us to do that. And that unrestricted funding is going to be really critical in the coming weeks, months, years, as we aim to respond to the needs as they change with our partners. So Syria has entered this new phase. Our promise is, as Action Syria, to support Syrian communities as they rebuild, and in our small way, continue to make a significant impact for thousands of Syrians each year. I will stop there because we've got still some minutes, and I hope you can all still join for a couple of questions. So I will hand back to Alicia for that.
Thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I will leave my camera off. So we have had a few questions come in advance and during the talks. We're probably not going to have time to get through them all, but we are releasing a blog piece tomorrow, and we'll hope to include some further details and answer some of those questions in that. So the first question, I guess this one is addressed to all three of you, is despite all the reasons to be pessimistic about what is going on, what would you say is one of the key things that would need to happen to maintain a sense of optimism regarding the future of the country?
If I
Go on,
may,
Mazen, you start.
yeah, if I may step up to answer this, I think one of the key things that needs to change is the lifting of sectoral sanctions in Syria. Really, there are no legal basis for these sanctions anymore. Most of these sanctions were uh, imposed of the Assad's regime. The Assad regime is now gone. So the legal basis for most of these sanctions is not relevant anymore. And of course, there are a lot of some opinions that sanctions should remain in order to ensure democratic governance somehow. I don't think that would work. Democracy cannot be built in the dark, and Syria is literally dark. During nights, people cannot see each other. You can see pictures of hundreds of Syrians meeting, eager to discuss politics and constitutional reforms and all of that, using their mobile phones to see each other. So we need electricity, we need investments, we need to re-energize the economy in order for people to be able to rebuild their country, to be able to fight for their newfound freedom, for the democratization. So lifting sanctions is an absolute must. And secondly, I think, as Rose said, Syria needs us all the time. Now, it needs more innovative solutions, supporting frontline organizations, supporting humanitarian assistance, supporting these civic initiatives that are flourishing everywhere. And this is, as Rose said, this is also part of our strategy as Action Syria, is to support and encourage the civic initiatives that are happening in Syria and trying to assist them in this turbulent times. Over to you, George.
I think more of the same. Economy and security first, probably security first. I think the honeymoon period is over for the new government, but security goes a long way in appeasing people, and then economy, investment, sanctions lifted. It makes no sense to have them, and then really small things like electricity for longer will begin to give people hope. But it's more than hope now, it's action, and we've all got to react to it.
Thank you. One more question around different groups within Syria. So specifically, what is the situation for the Kurds in Syria today? And then someone else has also asked, how are minority groups being affected with the recent political changes as well?
Oh yeah, these are very difficult questions, so I'm trying to answer very quickly. So, in the Kurdish majority areas of northeast Syria, it's still technically an autonomous region governed by the Autonomous Administration of Northeast Syria. However, they also signed an agreement with the new authorities in Damascus, and we have been receiving a lot of positive reports from both sides. The Kurdish forces are optimistic. They're trying to work and support some of the government's initiatives. They already signed specific agreements on different areas that were controlled by the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. But of course, they also demanding, rightly so, they're also demanding wider decentralization, political decentralization, more inclusive representation of minorities and ethnic and religious minorities in the government and other transitional bodies. But what's also positive about this is that the line of communication negotiations is open. They are meeting each other, and they've been sending very reassuring messages to each other, Northeast and Damascus. When it comes to minorities in Syria, that's also a very difficult question. The Alawite minority, as we said, are the most targeted minority by a lot of sectarian violence, given there is this, in my opinion, misbelief and misconception that the Syrian regime was an Alawite regime. It was not. Alawites were hostages like the rest of Syrians by the Assad regime, but unfortunately, a lot of people don't see it like this. When it comes to other minorities like Christians, for instance, of course, they are afraid that the personal freedoms might be shrinking due to some of the Islamist undertone of the new government. However, they celebrated Easter or Christmas without any problems or issues so far. As for the Druze community, for instance, the Druze minority, they're also demanding, like the Kurds, they also rightly so demanding wider decentralization and more representative governments.
Sorry, it took me a while to find my unmute button there. We do have a few more questions. If people are happy to, we can stay on the call until 2:10, but we completely understand if you all have to drop out. This will be recorded and we'll have it up on our website, hopefully tomorrow, so you can catch up on the bits that you missed. We have a question from William, which was in the chat. So, in an increasingly challenging environment for getting Syria back into the front page of the news, what can we all do to get Syria back in the news? So, back there might be a question for you, Rose.
I think, I mean, from my perspective, it's to talk about it with your friends, your families, read about it, read books about it, get into Syrian art and culture if you can. Something we always try to do here is to put on events that mention that. It is very challenging. I think there's a lot of noise on, all the news channels, whether it's Ukraine or the economic chaos that Trump is causing, etc. But I think the answer is to talk about it, not forget. The fact that you're all here is encouraging in itself, but I think ask your friends about it too. What do they know? What do they think? Because I think it's very easy to make a sort of black and white assumption. Oh, Assad's gone, everything's fine. Or, oh, HTS, whoever they are, have taken over, so everything's terrible. And of course, it's much more nuanced than that. And George and Mazen have both referred to that as well. But George, Mazen, do jump in to add to my answer too.
Well, I need to say thank you, William, for your difficult question, as always. Yeah, I mean, it was 4 months ago that we were in a church and doing carols in Farringdon, saying, "Oh God, we just need hope. If only something would happen, then we could all react." And now we can. This is the moment that we've been waiting for, and all of you have been loyal supporters of Hands Up and Action Syria. So I think this is the moment to react and to remind people. And I've just been transcribing an interview from a man called Father Jihad, who is a Christian monk from the middle of near Nabuk in Syria. I interviewed him about a month ago, and he ended his interview. The Christians, of which there are only about 250,000, they don't have guns, very reliant on protection from whoever's in power, but also have an interesting view because they can't resort to fighting, so they're always trying to find a diplomatic way of surviving in Syria. And he finished by saying this: "I'm positive. Change is not something that will happen. It won't fall from heaven. But if we do something, if each one of us does our best, we collaborate, we think together, we reflect together, and we stretch our hands towards the others, then everything is possible." And I thought that was just an incredibly nice sentiment, and one that's I think needed around the world, but also needed in Syria. And if you ever need to go back on holiday somewhere, Marmoush had 30,000 visitors a year in 2008. It now has less than 100, and it's the most. Look it up when you with this call. It's the most magical place where you can stay for free and live amongst the monks there. So there are pockets of wonderful beauty and tranquility. It's still in Syria, and most of them lie with the people, but some of it as well in the countryside.
Thank you, George. I think that's a lovely note to end on. We do have a few more questions that's coming live, one specifically around people returning from Lebanon to Syria, which we can definitely answer in our blog piece tomorrow. So do keep an eye out for that. And just finally, is there any final comments from either you, George, or Mazen, or you, Rose, as well?
I just want to quickly say that Syria is in the news usually when there's horrible, horrible things that are happening in Syria. That's how the news work. So we shouldn't rely on the media. We should rely on ourselves. We should rely on organizations like Action Syria and a lot of our partners as well. We know that if something is on the news, that means more people will be enthusiastic and supportive. But I think, as Rose said, this is our challenge, and we need your help to keep people interested in Syria, despite that Syria is now not a headline and might not be a headline for a long time. I hope Syria won't be a headline anytime soon, because again, when it only makes headline when something horrible has happened. So that's why I think we need to rely on each other, and I think we need to support different Syrian initiatives. And I believe Action Syria is a brilliant way of doing that.
Thank you, Mazen. So that's it from us. We will, as I said, make sure we pop a blog post up tomorrow, and hopefully this recording will be ready tomorrow for you to listen back. We will try our best to answer any of the questions that we missed in that blog post as well. Please do keep an eye in your email inboxes the next couple of days. We will be sending out some further information about how you can get involved and how you can support us going forward as well. My colleague will be sharing a link in this chat as well as a brief evaluation. I think there's only 4 or 5 questions, so please do fill that out if you have time, but I know we have overrun, but it would be very much appreciated. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, George, Mazen, and Rose, and hopefully see everyone again soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.